Welcome to Your Success Podcast. We give you actionable insight and stories behind real-life success wherever you go. Here are your hosts, Angelos and Mo.
Welcome to Your Success Podcast. I'm Angelos.
And I'm Mo.
So tonight we're privileged to have a panel of experts to discuss all things about property, commercial conversions and developments.
And this is a live Your Success Podcast recording from the Exeter Professional Investment Group. And to prove it, audience, can you give us a little cheer? Hey! Sounds like there's a lot more people here than there is. No, that's cool.
So we're going to start by going around the table and just asking for a short introduction from all of our panelists. So, Peter.
Yeah, Peter O'Hara, property developer now, been in property since 2005, building portfolios from buy-to-lets, HMOs, holiday lets and SAs.
Paula.
Hi, I'm Paula Kalis from Amethyst Mortgage Services. I've been a mortgage broker for 11 years, investor for 18, and I specialise in all sorts of finance from buy-to-lets all the way up to developments.
Hi, I'm James. I'm a director of KHP. I started my career in commercial construction, essentially building supermarkets. Me and Mo met at university, and for the last 4 years we've been doing developments in Plymouth and Saltash down in the southwest.
Hi, I'm Philip Bailey. I'm an architect. I'm also a director of KHP. I run my own company up in St Albans for about 25 odd years, and I moved down here about 5 years ago, and I've been seriously into property investment since then, specialising in development.
Hi, I'm Gordon McCaw. I'm a tax planning specialist, so I give people tax advice, tell them how to reduce their tax bills, all in ways that are government approved, if you like, but at the same time do take a little bit of thought and expertise.
Brilliant, thank you guys. So let's start with our developers on the panel. So just to explain how this is going to work, we've collated some questions from Your Success Podcast listeners and the audience. So we're going to throw some of those out and then we're going to open it up to a Q&A. So starting with our developers on the panel, do you wish you started the development business model earlier? Peter, do you want to start?
Yes, I think the honest answer is yes, I do wish I'd started it earlier, but that would have meant I'd have had to get over some hurdles around education and things earlier. I gradually learnt my trade, if you like, over time. So I got to a point where I could do developments. But if I'd have started earlier, then yes, I do wish I could have got into developments earlier. They're much more fun.
Everything was a lot cheaper earlier as well. I hate looking back 3 years ago and thinking, we've got such good deals back then. And nowadays we're like, a few years on, we're paying hundreds of thousands more for commercial conversions.
Yeah, I think the earlier you can get into it, the more successful you can be. But you've got to come at the right time for you. I've run a very successful architect's practice for a while. I didn't need to do development as such then. I didn't want to take the risk. Maybe I'm slightly more risk averse, but you need to be in the right place for you to do it.
I think that's a really important point that you guys picked up on there about sort of taking incrementally larger steps and building up to developments. And maybe it's not something that's taught widely in the education space, but actually building up to it is a really, really good bit of advice. What do you guys think stopped you? Do you think it was just the sort of lack of having the knowledge or at the time getting into it?
I think so, yes. Actually coming into the property investing network, I now am host of a similar sort of network in Exeter here. It's actually getting that mindset right. And until I had it, I didn't feel that property investing necessarily was right for me. So it's mindset, I think, is a lot of it.
Yeah, I'd agree. Mindset's a big part. It's also knowing your own risk profile as well, I think. So you know what you're comfortable with, or you learn to be comfortable with bigger numbers. So I think I'm probably talking myself out of this. It's not necessarily a greater risk. It can just be perceived as a greater risk when you first start out. And I just wasn't really aware of what developing was all about. It took me a while to learn that and then to take the leap into doing it.
So what would you say the main obstacles are to starting a commercial conversion, development, that kind of thing? James, if we start with you.
As these guys said, I think firstly you need to convince yourself to do it and realise that actually you can work much more professionally with a larger project. With a small buy-to-let, it takes a lot of time you put a lot of your own time into it. With a larger commercial conversion, you can employ professionals, architects and engineers to ensure everything's done at a much more professional level.
And Paula, in terms of getting into doing developments, do you find people coming to you that are a bit too soon, trying to get into biting off a bit more than they can chew, or at the other end of the scale that are doing probably smaller projects and they could actually cope with?
I think I would say that I probably see the people that are too early, perhaps from a financial point of view, because lenders like experience and track record of specifically commercial stuff. So you might find that you might have a big buy-to-let portfolio that might not be enough for a lender. And I think that a lot of the time when you're new in property, you see the cash that's available in commercial stuff, and that sometimes falsely pushes people down the route that they're maybe not ready for. And it's all about knowing where you're going and what you need to get to that point. And that's why you need to talk to people really and know that you're ready for it really.
We talked about a little bit about mindset and education and making sure that you are ready in your property journey, but there's a lot to consider when it comes to tax. Mm-hmm. So from a tax point of view, Gordon, what are the things that we need to consider if you're starting to look at going down this road?
Well, yeah, I think there's 3 or 4 main taxes I would think about initially. First one's a big one, VAT. A lot of time, especially with the commercial conversion, people don't necessarily do the research at the outset, don't appreciate they've got 20% VAT to pay. Sometimes, depending on what they're doing, they haven't budgeted for the fact that they've got this big bill, and that can make everything fall over at the outset. The other one, stamp duty land tax. Again, there's a lot of money that can be saved if you get the right advice. Sometimes people I meet, they Google the answer, or they maybe speak to the solicitor and they don't always do the best research or get a specialist to really help them. And I think you only kind of learn that by going down the journey and realising that, I've lost a bit of money here, it could have been a bit better if I got better advice. And then the third thing I think is bigger picture. The government's brought in some horrible new rules in terms of income tax, and what they can do is treat property development-based gains as subject to income tax. That can mean 45% tax on some of your profits. So again, getting some really good business structure-based advice, very important at the outset. I could go on. You have to.
So just very quickly, Gordon, are you saying that Google isn't necessarily going to give you the best advice?
Well, it's nearly as bad as the HMRC website. Don't go to the tax man and ask them for tax advice, because their job is to collect tax.
I think that's a really important point that you just flagged there about starting with the end in mind, and it's maybe not something that people think about, but actually it affects a lot of your decisions about joint venture partners, what type of funding you do, what kind of deals you look at. But it's quite rare to actually think about the big picture, I think.
Yeah, and I think get advice at the outset as well. Again, capital allowance is one of those things where sometimes you might work hard and negotiate a lower price for a property, and then a bit of a way down the line, suddenly you realise that you're committed to having a place of very low value on capital allowances. I won't go into a lot of the detail on it, but it effectively means that you're going to lose money, large sums of money sometimes, by not getting the right advice, doing the right negotiating at the outset.
Can I just quickly chuck in a question here, Gordon? Petrol stations and reclaiming that land, making it good again. There are some really attractive tax incentives there, aren't there?
Oh, absolutely. Don't get me started. Land remediation relief is fantastic. We go from a situation where we have not just 100% tax relief, but 150% tax relief. So from a tax advisor's perspective, if someone says to me, I've got some asbestos in my property, I say, that's brilliant. I say, can you chuck in some Japanese knotweed as well? Not always the best commercially, but there's lots of tax relief.
Cool, thank you. Can development be done if you're starting with no personal funds? You hear a lot of people saying out there in the commercial and development world saying, no personal funds required, 100% funding, etc., etc. What is your view and what are lenders' view on that, Paula?
I would say probably 100% lending from a lender is probably slightly far-fetched. Lenders like you to have a bit of skin in the game. And but it's not saying that you can't get 100% funding, you just might not get it from the lender. And the other thing that you have to think about is lenders they won't finance properties without planning permission. So it might be that you have to borrow money from somewhere else to get it to the point where your planning's there, and then they'll go ahead and do the funding. And they might do it if you've got a couple of different bits of property on a site that's just needing conversion, and then one bit of the site needs planning. You might get lending on the conversion part while you're getting planning, and then they'll lend in stages as you get the planning. So maybe 100% not right at the beginning, but there are other options, as the other guys will probably be able to.
I was just going to ask, and thank you, Paula. And from your guys' point of view, personal experiences in terms of funding up to 100%, maybe not from the lender itself, but from joint venture partners, etc.
Yeah, so there's always the options of going to private funders for kind of the remainder for the deposit, essentially, when you're buying a commercial property. The other thing is when you add the value to the property, you can then essentially remortgage and release the funds as you're adding the value to kind of fund the end of the project by releasing the value from the ones that you've completed.
Okay, so generally speaking, lenders don't necessarily want to give you 100% because they want to see that you've got some skin in the game. Peter, what are your views on that?
I agree. I think I'm going to be slightly radical. I think there's some disingenuous sort of statements made out there that you can do it with no money. It's a ridiculous statement. It always has been. You can do it with none of your own money, but you have to structure it incredibly carefully because you're using somebody's money somewhere, whether it's senior debt, mezz funding, private equity, whatever it is, and you're going to need some money up front. Development is not a cash flowing model. And I think that's where some people do become slightly unglued at the beginning. Set yourself up, get your cash flow sorted for your private self, because development creates large sums of money, but it can be anywhere 12, 18, 24, 36 months down the line, and you've got to live in between. You've got a cash flow. It's not a buy-to-let. It's not a big buy-to-let. So do your sums at the first.
Yeah, and also you have to remember if you're doing a development and you're starting with land, there's nothing there for a lender. They might lend you a bit of cash against the land, but lenders don't tend to like lending against land only. But, if there's nothing there, you haven't got anything there, that you're asking them to give you money on nothing. So you have to just try to put yourself in a lender's shoes. There are a lot of good lenders out there that want to help people, but they have risk profiles that they have to work to. And if you're asking them to give you, £500,000 on a bit of green, then they might say, okay, let's get the planning, let's get the footings in, and then we'll do it. And they tend, like Joe said, they do it in stages. They tend to do that in stages. And as the development gets worth, if you like, that's when they will refinance and refund to the worth of the development.
Okay.
I think there's two parts to this. One is credibility, so it's about having a team that actually has the track record and experience, and then you'll get people coming to you, whether they're private investors or they're mezzanine funders or main funders or whatever, and there's lots of options there, but you've got to have the credibility to be able to get that. And then the second part of it really is, if I can remember it, is to know what you're trying to achieve at the end of the day. Money isn't cheap. If you want 100% of the funding, you're going to have to pay for it. And that can be really, really expensive. I know people that are quite happily prepared to offer 25, 35% of the money per year for the funds because they know they're taking a risk now. But that's an awful lot of money to give away if you don't have to.
That's a very good point there. Absolutely vital to get your sums right. Sourcing. Okay, so we've had a look at the funding, we've had a look at mindset. Forgive the pun, but how on earth do you find these deals? And I'm sorry, shut up, Peter.
There's a few ways that we use, actually. One is we've got some contacts. We've got some contacts that actually help source for us. I think the other one is just make it known what you're looking for. It's a huge one. You'd be really surprised who comes up and talks to you if they know what it is you're looking for. You know, a lot of people keep their cards too close to the chest, I think, and then they wonder why nobody offers them anything, nobody talks. I'm not suggesting you give away everything, but you need to tell them what you're looking for. The deal that we've got in St Ives literally came from a conversation just saying, I want to do bigger things. And that was it. That was the statement. And somebody came, well, I've got one. Do you want it? Very fortuitous. It's never happened quite that easily again. But that's the idea for me, I think.
And you live by the mantra, say yes, and then find out how after, don't you, Peter?
Always. Yeah. It's, yeah. Well, I'd say within risk-managed limits. Yeah, say yes to it, even if it's only the initial yes, and then find out how to do it later. Why not?
At KHP, we've actually taken the decision to take someone else on to do it. Our very own Catherine, who's sitting in the audience here, who we've charged with going out, talking to agents, talking to various people. We all do the same thing as well, but it's just being bizarrely specific about what it is that you want. We're very much into working with heritage buildings, so anything that's a bit unusual, a bit difficult for others, because of the experience of the team, because we've got a passion for it. I think that actually helps us to find deals in that way. Still not easy, still have to put a lot of due diligence in to make sure we get the right deal, but actually the ability to look at projects becomes much easier that way.
And it's great having a full-time member of staff just working.
Absolutely.
And Gordon, just on that point, that Peter mentioned about just telling people what you do, do you find that there's opportunities that come up through your work that you're able to then share sort of leads on?
Well, absolutely, yeah. So by the very nature of what I do, meeting people, you're often sometimes we've got developers, got property investors, got people with money. Sometimes you can help bring those people together, and just by meeting, having a good network of contacts. I think coming to events like this, and like coming along the Pig, and meeting people, and after a little while as well, you tend to, I think, meet people in the local business community as well who know where the best deals are and who hear about them first, and that's the place to be because it's become so competitive out there.
Peter?
Yes, similar to many other sort of business models as well. Walk your ground, drive your ground, look around. You'd be surprised what you come across. Google's a great, Google Earth. There are other programs available. But Google Earth is a great one. Go to your local town. Just zoom in on it, look for the green spaces, look for the old buildings, look for the brown sites. You can then find out who owns them yourself and go direct to vendor, which is the ideal route to be, is direct to vendor. You know, you have control over that with them directly then. But don't rule out any way of finding those plots. You know, they're out there. There's loads of technology. There are other ones that will, for a fee, also give you all land registry details, etc. They're worth looking at. I'm not going to keep throwing names out there.
Brilliant, thanks guys. So moving on to due diligence, I think Phil, you mentioned it just now, so it fits quite well. James, what key elements of due diligence do you focus on when you're assessing kind of a potential new development deal?
So that's the next big thing, really. You go out and you source a deal. As soon as you've had offer accepted, you need to be able to quickly move through the due diligence to determine whether the deal actually stacks up, whether you're going to get planning permission, whether it's viable, and quite often it's just knowing like the shape of the building, the size of the building. So we've, with Catherine's assistance over the last few months, we've worked to really build like a model to analyse these deals as they come through. But quite often the first thing we do is go to a RIC surveyor to get an actual valuation of the site in its current position and when it's completed. Measured surveys, we know exactly how big it is, and then Phil, with his architect's experience, kind of creates the floor plans for each building, for each flat. And then it's into planning, whether you can actually get planning. So pre-application we'll quite often do, and then go into full planning to work out whether we can actually get planning.
Here's a question for you guys. So a RICS valuer goes out. He's looking at your lovely greens field. Yeah. There's nothing built. There's nothing for miles around. How can he find the end value of what you're looking to build? What's he going to base it on? So
we really put a lot of effort into selling to the RICS valuer what our vision is going to be for the project. So we'll create a pack with floor plans. We'll do a lot of interior design, sort of mock-ups of the flats. And then we'll kind of handle all this information with estate agent valuations as well to kind of steer him in the best way towards the valuation that we're looking for. And we found that really works in the past.
And Peter, you've got an amazing development down in St Ives, haven't you, with great views from the penthouse. Do you want to just share very quickly how you managed to get an approximate end value before you'd actually done the work?
That one for us was slightly different. We had a valuation on the site. The place was still trading, so it was difficult to do any kind of exploratory works, etc., inside, invasive works. I literally went out to 7 estate agents in St Ives, tasked them with giving me a market appraisal. And then, having spoken to them and told them what we're going to do, a little bit like James was saying, you actually give them the end vision. We didn't actually have the CGIs at that stage, but we just talked them through what we were looking to achieve, rough sizes of apartments, that kind of thing, layouts, the car parks included, which is, every car park in St Ives is worth 55 grand, so we always try and make sure car parks are there. And then literally working with those 7, for us, it was about picking the best ones to work with. So some of our due diligence just on estate agents, for instance, is who handles the right sort of stock that we're trying to sell. Some agents don't specialise in high-end premium stock. They take other stuff. So we were looking to find those agents that normally work with those and good connections all over the country. Because with cash buyers, you want them coming from afar, not just from your locality.
And I think I don't want to move on from due diligence just yet, because I think it's a really important point. So, Paula, from your point of view, do you find that people that come to you are quite progressed in their due diligence, or you're sort of going through their deal appraisals and finding holes in it?
I think that it depends on your experience level as to where you are. A lot of investors will, if it's their first development, they might well think that they've done the due diligence required. But of course, a lender or a financer might want something completely different, because what they're wanting from you is something slightly different to what you maybe think, especially if it's your first deal. So it's about really helping them to say, yeah, this is great what you've got, but actually you're going to need a little bit more than that, and it's going to likely to be this, and this. So, yeah, it is helping them along. If you get a more experienced person, the chances are they're pretty much almost there, and it's lender-specific stuff that then comes into play, because one lender will want much more than another lender, and it's about knowing the lender and saying, right, okay, well, you're almost there, but you're going to need this, and this, So it's, on the whole, most people don't come with 100% of what they need, but depending on their experience, they're all,
So would your advice be to get, sort of engage yourself and get the information across to you as early as possible, so you can sort of help them shape it?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose the one thing that's important to say is, as a broker, and I'm not sort of developers like these guys are, so there will be certain things that I will not be able to help them with. But of course, the earlier they come, the easier it is for us to work together to get us to where they need them to, they need to be ultimately.
So really, you need a good power team around you, and to work with them from an early point, as opposed to just saying, right, I've done it, let's go. It just doesn't work. So Gordon, has anyone ever put a deal across your desk and you've gone, Jesus Christ, something's gone wrong here?
Yeah, now and again, absolutely. Sometimes things come out within cash flows, especially with first-time developers, and they think, oh, this is going to be fantastic, and they have budgeted for the corporation tax bill and things like that. Even that due diligence, it's key to tax planning. It's knowing what you're buying and what you can do with it. For example, I had someone come to see me recently buying a commercial property. There was a tenant in place, and they were going to say, right, move out for the deal, buy a vacant possession, come along and see me, and I said, well, yeah, maybe that's not the best way to do it, because you're going to have to pay 20% VAT. So what they agreed to do was leave the tenant in for an extra month, then move them on. It meant that they were buying a property with a sitting tenant, which is a business, and means that there's no VAT to pay. So sometimes with a little bit of pre-plan and things like that, things like stamp duty, land tax, if you can buy a company rather than buying the property, or even student accommodation qualifies for an exemption from the 3% surcharge, spending time, investing a bit of energy and thought and knowing what you're buying and the different tax advantages that are around can save you a huge amount of money.
That's awesome advice. Thanks, Gordon. Go on, Paula.
Just one other thing. I think it's, it's important that when we're talking about getting things done early, development finance is complex. Most commercial finance, that is not necessarily development finance, is complex. And the chances are it's not going to be quick. So you need to be ready for that. The worst thing you can do is have offered, it took 3 months of due diligence, then the vendor's shouting at you to get stuff done. Then you go to the broker and say, I need it next week. And that's likely to cause an issue because there's so much complexity that it's something that you can't rush normally. Bridging finance, different. Yeah, you might be able to get bridging finance relatively quickly, but if you want full development funding, that's likely to take a little bit longer. So just be aware.
Yes, sorry, just to add...
We're going to move on, but go on, just quick.
Just to add something to the thought about due diligence as well, please don't think it's just around the finance, the development, the site. When you're looking at teams, contractors, do your due diligence on the contractors as well. How long have they been trading? What's their balance sheets like? What's their profit and loss accounts like? What have they declared? Have they actually submitted to Companies House? Because you're going to try and set up contracts with them, which if they default on, the very worst could be catastrophic. The very least it's going to cause you is a massive loss of time until you set up find another contractor. Once your site's up and running, that's going to cost you an awful lot in what's called preliminaries. The costs of running the site, whether or not any building work is done. Yeah? So all that kind of stuff will cost you a fortune. So don't just focus on the deal, focus on everyone that you're going to have involved in it, including the people who are going to lend you money. If it's a private investor, we do due diligence on our private investors because I need to know once I've signed them up that they are going to release that money when it's needed. If it's stage released and not all up front in one tranche. Yeah, because if they default, I've got problems again.
Yeah, really good points there, Peter. So we're going to talk about we're going to come on to talk about liability on completed developments. So it's not all cheery on this panel, but I think the way we thought about this was there's enough courses and information out there that will give you sort of the high level. This is how much you can make and things like that. Whereas we really want to go into what's the experience that these guys have got, because I think that's where the value is. So let's talk about liability. Things like CDM, health and safety. I suppose, James, we'll start with you. Can you explain what these things mean and where exactly the responsibility lies in development projects? If you've got a team of experts doing it, does that mean you're completely off the hook? Or
So CDM stands for Construction Design and Management, and essentially covers all the health and safety around construction. Essentially, it puts responsibility on every person involved in the construction project, whether you're a contractor, client, like even end users and designers as well. A good example is when they do the green roofs, you quite often see cables running around the outside. So when the guy's up there strimming the roof, you can clip on, and so they've designed in safety, so he's not going to fall off the edge of the roof in, say, 10 years' time when they're up there cutting the roof. But there's responsibility for everyone involved, so you can't pass your responsibilities over to the contractor that's doing the work. But Phil might be able to provide some information on that as well.
Yeah, I act as a principal designer, which means that I have a duty to ensure that the employer, who is the main person who's liable, actually has a duty to make sure that everyone he employs will act to make sure that the building and the construction of that building, the maintenance, and indeed the final demolition of that building can be actually carried out safely. So it's about understanding